Hello and welcome to the Lincoln Journey. We're on part 9 of the Conspirators, the story of the Lincoln assassination. Last time we got John Wilkes Booth and accomplice David Harold safely out of Washington after Booth shot Lincoln, thanks to the laxity of the guard at the Navy Yard Bridge. This time I want to start by going back to Ford's Theater and addressing a couple of things, namely the death of Abraham Lincoln and the ankle of John Wilkes Booth. As for Lincoln, I don't propose to go into heartbreaking detail of his final hours. This story is called The Conspirators after all, but we should at least pay our respects to the fallen president with a quick review. So, Booth shoots Lincoln, struggles with Major Rathbone, jumps to the stage, exits stage right, mounts his horse and lights out for Maryland. Back in the presidential box, Mary Lincoln's screams alert the audience to what has occurred. After a brief shocked paralysis, the audience explodes and pandemonium reigns. Doctors from the audience find Lincoln breathing but unconscious and determine that the wound is fatal. Lincoln is carried across the street to a boarding house where he is laid on a bed that his assassin had lounged upon just weeks earlier. Various government officials crowd the building through the night, and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton sets up a headquarters in a back parlor where he gathers information, interrogates witnesses, and sends out orders. The simultaneous attack on Seward indicates a broad conspiracy, and fears and rumors of further assassinations and a general attack on the city are rampant. Jefferson Davis's Confederate government is assumed to be involved. Doctors attend Lincoln through the night, but there is no hope of recovery. He dies at 7:22 on the morning of April 15th. The news spreads like lightning throughout the country and turns ecstatic bliss over the Union's victory, in the North at least, into shocked and despairing grief. This emotion is quickly joined by a bloodthirsty desire for vengeance. Next, let's consider the comparatively trivial but always intriguing issue of Booth's ankle. How did he break it? Well, everybody knows that he broke it jumping down the 10 or 12 feet from the presidential box to the stage of Ford's Theater. Or did he? Although this explanation is accepted and taught the world over, I no longer accept it, thanks mainly to authors Michael Kaufman and Timothy S. Good. In his book, We Saw Lincoln Shot, 100 Eyewitness Accounts. Good divides these accounts into time periods, those written immediately, those provided at the trial of the conspirators, those given through 1908, and the largest group of all, oddly enough, those given after 1908. The accounts written by people before they could be influenced by someone else's description of events sometimes contradict each other on various details like the order of events and what Booth said. But the one thing the witnesses all agreed on in the days directly following the assassination is that Booth moved swiftly to escape. Here are some quotes. He ran across the stage. He ran with lightning speed across the stage, rushed across the stage, whisked across the stage. He ran toward me. Then, with a rapid stage stride, he crossed the stage, and striding across the stage, disappeared before the audience could recover from the shock. It was the same with those who gave evidence at the trial. I saw a man running toward me, strode across the stage. I saw a man with no hat on running toward the back door. No one, not even those who describe Booth having an awkward landing after his jump from the box, suggests that he limped away or that he betrayed the pain of a broken leg or ankle. However, roughly 5.5 hours later in southern Maryland, Dr. Samuel Mudd had to cut the boot away from his now swollen leg in order to set Booth's left fibula, which had broken clean across, about 2 inches above the ankle. Experienced emergency room doctors like my friend, the late Blaine Holmes, an expert in the Lincoln assassination, do not discount the possibility that Booth was able to cross the stage with a broken leg. From my medical experience, Holmes said in a 2020 interview, I've known people to walk a mile or two with a broken ankle, which you would not think would be possible. I've seen people come into the emergency room days later with a broken ankle somewhat similar to Booth's. Incidentally, Blaine gave me these pictures behind me several years ago. I didn't find out that he had passed away until I went looking for a picture of him on the internet. Thanks for everything, Blaine. Rest in peace, my friend. But Dr. Holmes didn't believe Booth broke the bone in his leap, and neither do I. So then, what happened? Michael Kaufman in American Brutus points out that Booth told everyone that night that his horse tripped and fell on him, breaking his ankle. Getting a little ahead of our story, I will reveal that Booth told this to Davy Harold at their Maryland rendezvous. Furthermore, they made 2 stops that night, and at both stops, Booth told the same story. And this is supported by the fact that at some point after meeting up, Booth and Harold switched horses, with Booth ending up on good old Charlie, who, as you will remember, was described by stableman John Fletcher as a lady's saddle horse, and anyone could ride him, he was so gentle and nice. Meanwhile, it was noted that Booth's original horse, the Bay, was lamed by a bad cut on her left front leg. But why did people think it happened at the theater? Because John Wilkes Booth told a different story to the world. Here comes another spoiler. Sorry, but I want to dispose of this distraction. After Booth was run to earth, a diary of sorts was found on him in which he claims that's how it happened, as part of a self-pitying rant. He justifies himself in a page full of exaggerations, distortions, and outright lies. Here's a quote. I shouted, "Sic semper," before I fired, implying that he didn't shoot Lincoln from behind with no warning. Wrong. Another quote. In jumping, broke my leg. Wrong. He presented a romanticized version of himself in his act, and having a horse fall on him wasn't heroic enough. Although the diary was suppressed for several years, Booth's captors leaked his version of his wound shortly after he was apprehended, and that's when some people's recollections started to include a limping exit. I'll try to include the whole diary page later, but let's get back to where we left off last time. Duping Sergeant Silas Cobb to get across the Navy Yard Bridge after hours may have been the last satisfying experience of John Wilkes Booth's life. From then on, little went right, and even when it did, satisfaction was hard to achieve given the complications that arose. After crossing into Maryland, Booth met David Harold at their rendezvous point of Soper's Hill, from which they proceeded to Surratt's Tavern, where supplies awaited them. When they arrived at about midnight, Booth was in too much pain to dismount. Harold pounded on the side door of the tavern until John Lloyd awoke and came downstairs. He recognized Harold as a friend of John Surratt's. Davy was in a hurry. Lloyd, for God's sake, he whispered loudly, make haste and get those things. Lloyd knew what he meant. He retrieved the carbines and binoculars from his bedroom while Harold had a glass of whiskey at the bar. They went outside to Booth. Harold offered Booth the whiskey bottle, which he greedily drank from and returned, and Lloyd offered him a carbine, which he had to decline because he needed both hands to stay in the saddle. He told Lloyd that his horse had fallen on him, breaking his leg, and asked if there was a surgeon in the neighborhood. Lloyd didn't know of any still practicing. Harold gave Lloyd the nearly empty whiskey bottle and $1 for the contents. As the riders turned to the road, Booth had some parting words. I will tell you some news if you want to hear it, he said. Lloyd was more interested in returning to his bed. I am not particular. Use your own pleasure about telling it, he responded. Well, said Booth, I am pretty certain that we have assassinated the President and Secretary Seward. and then they were gone. Booth already knew where he could find a surgeon. Booth became acquainted with Dr. Samuel Mudd while in southern Maryland in November or December of 1864, and even spent a night at his house. They met again, either by chance or design, before Christmas in Washington, where Mudd introduced Booth to John Surratt at Booth's request. While sympathetic to the rebel cause, Mudd appeared to be more acquainted with the Confederate underground than involved with it. There is a question of whether visiting Mudd at 4 a.m. on April 15th was part of Booth's escape plan or not. It may have been a detour made necessary by his broken leg and Booth's inability to find another surgeon, or, according to a post-conviction statement by George Atzerodt, Booth had sent liquor and provisions ahead of time so that Mudd's house would serve as a way station. Either way, when Mudd learned of Lincoln's assassination later on the 15th, he angrily confronted Booth and Harold about it, but he did not immediately advise the authorities. We'll talk more about Mudd later, but let's check in with other conspirators. Booth and Harold were the only conspirators who fled to the south after the assassination, trying to follow the path mapped out for the abduction of the president in the original plan. George Atzerodt headed north to Germantown, Maryland, where he had relatives. Lewis Powell never left the District of Columbia and slept 2 nights in a tree. Mary Surratt held her breath in the house on H Street. Sam Arnold was already south of Booth and Harold, still working for the sutler at Fortress Monroe in Virginia. Booth had not destroyed Arnold's letter to him, as Arnold had asked, and it was found in Booth's trunk at the National Hotel. Detectives quickly picked up Sam's trail and arrested him at 7 a.m. on Monday, April 17th. Arnold saw no point in dissimulating. He gave up everything he knew, and soon the detectives were sending back to Washington this wire. You will arrest J.W. Booth, a Michael O'Loughlin of Baltimore, a G.W. Atzerodt, alias Port Tobacco, of Charles County, Maryland, and John Surratt, residents not known, as all are implicated. Later on Monday in Baltimore, Michael O'Loughlin heard he was being asked for. He made arrangements to surrender at the home of his sister so that his mother would not see him being arrested. Put on the train to Washington, he told his escort that he had signed on for a kidnapping, but had withdrawn as soon as the government reinstituted the prisoner exchange. Also on Monday, the War Department received a hot tip. Susan Mahoney, an African-American servant at the Surratt boarding house, told her aunt that she had seen some suspicious men stop at the house on the night of the assassination. The aunt told a War Department employee, and at 8:45 p.m. on the 17th, Major Henry Smith and 2 detectives were sent to H Street to arrest anyone there. They were sent to the wrong address. They returned, got the right address and 2 more men, and were soon surrounding Surratt's house. They found Mary Surratt and her daughter Anna, the one who couldn't pronounce Atzerodt. Major Smith sent for a carriage to transport the ladies to jail. Anna was badly shaken, but Mary was composed and tried to calm her daughter. They waited. The carriage didn't come. Major Smith grew impatient and started to tell one of his men to go hurry it along when he was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was a tall, dark-haired man with a pickaxe. Asked his business, he said he had come to dig a gutter for Mrs. Surratt. At this hour of the night, they asked. He said he hoped he could spend the night in the basement and start early in the morning. Major Smith brought Mary from the parlor and asked if she knew the man. She swore she did not. But she told a lie. It was Lewis Powell. The carriage came and the women were taken off to the headquarters of General Christopher Columbus Augur, the military commander of the Department of Washington. Another carriage took Powell to the same destination. Mary's interrogation began immediately. She didn't deny knowing John Wilkes Booth, but she did deny just about everything else. Asked again about Powell, she said, "The ruffian that was in my door when I came away? He was a tremendous hard fellow with a skull cap on, and my daughter commenced crying and said, 'These gentlemen came to save our lives. I hope they arrested him. I believe he would have murdered us, every one, I assure you." Lewis Powell looked mighty suspicious, showing up like he did, claiming to know Mary when she denied knowing him. But the detectives didn't really know who he was. At the headquarters, they took Powell and several other detainees into a room full of people. William Bell, the servant who had tried to talk Powell out of his medicine at the Seward house, and who had run into the street screaming bloody murder, was in the room, and he scrutinized the new arrivals. When he saw Powell, he froze. They locked eyes. Then Bell walked up and pointed his finger directly in Powell's face, which broke into a wide grin. So it was that on Monday, April 17th, 3 days after the assassinations, the authorities arrested 4 conspirators: Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Loughlin, Mary Surratt, and Lewis Powell. But where was Booth? Where was the famous actor who had shot the president and gloried in his act before a crowd of 1,500 people? Was he warming his hands at the fire in a comfortable house, being petted by defiant Confederate sympathizing planters and belles? No, he was hiding out on the wet ground of a pine thicket about 40 miles south of Washington, unable to stand unaided, with nothing but tree boughs to protect him from the cold rain. Let's leave him there suffering until we come back for part 10.